On this episode of the Open in Indiana podcast, we speak to the chair for the creation of new clubs for Rotary District 6560. Don't miss it. Welcome, everyone, to the Open in Indiana podcast, where we feature the people, places, and events that make Indiana a great place to live, work, and visit. Today, our guest is chair of the creation of new clubs for Rotary District 6560, Jeff Lake. Jeff, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ryan. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. Jeff, you shared some exciting news here recently that our district has officially added a brand new Rotary Club on the south side. Would you like to share a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, but I'll keep it short. Originally, back about a year ago, we were working with, and I say we, the Downtown Rotary Club has been working with the Chin community of Indiana. And one of the things we wanted to do to help them to get immersed in the community was to create a satellite club at that point, which is an extension of our club. And we did that a little over a year ago. And it only takes 8 people to start one. So it's really not that hard to start. So that we started with that about a year ago, and that club has grown now to 21 members. And when you become at least 20 members, you're able to request from Rotary International to be an independent club, because prior to that, we were housed or hosted by the downtown club. So the great news is it's rare to get a new club started these days, but we have found that using the satellite concept, which only starts with 8 members, makes it much easier to do it.
And so, Jeff, you mentioned the Chin community of Indiana. Would you like to give our audience a little bit of a bio on what the Chin community is and where those folks have migrated from?
Yeah, sure. The Chin community of Indiana has a little headquarters on East Stop 11 Road on the south side near Madison Avenue, and there are approximately 20,000 Chin living in that area, and they're from Burma, and they are refugees for the most part from Burma. Some are immigrants, but most are refugees, meaning they were basically forced out of their own country because they're Christian, and the country is run by the military and the Buddhists, and they don't want Christians to be there. And so a lot of them have come to Indianapolis because they have heard that this is a great place to come because the cost of living is relatively low. You know, they can buy houses, they can get jobs. And they also have a support group here called the Chin Community of Indiana, which is a 501c3 that's been around for about 15 years. And so in 2016, our club, the Downtown Club, provided them with a $250,000 grant, which is very unusual, very high. Normally our grant's only $25,000 or $10,000, but it was a legacy grant, which means we wanted it to last for a long time. So that was in 2016. The last payment of the $50,000 for a year per year ended in June of this past year, but we got an extension for 3 more years at $50,000. So now we're going out to June 2023. So we've been a big financial supporter, obviously, of the Chin community of Indiana. They have 5 staff people that handle all kinds of problems, as you can imagine, because some of the people can't speak English at all. Some of them can speak a little bit of English, and they're helping people get jobs. They're teaching them how to, teaching them English, the English language. They're teaching them civics classes. They're helping with all kinds of problems that because of the language and cultural barrier, they're not able to handle on their own. They need help.
And so, Jeff, when did the topic first come up that partnering the Downtown Rotary Club of Indianapolis with the Chin community? How did that conversation start, and how did that fit into Rotary service areas?
Well, it's interesting. We, as a club, we have our own foundation, which has about $7 million in it now. It's been around for 45, 50 years. And so that foundation has many times funded large projects. We did a large project with Raleigh Hospital. We did a large project with Gleaners Food Bank. And so the foundation board said, why don't we try to do something on a different scale where we don't have to ask everybody to, provide a lot of funding, because we provided $1 million and $1.5 million to those two organizations that I mentioned. So we sent out a gentleman by the name of Ralph Taylor, who's very well connected in the community, especially with groups that are underserved. And so he interviewed a lot of the immigrant and refugee groups and came back and made a recommendation that the Chin community of Indiana would be the best one to work with.
And so, Jeff, as the Southport International Rotary Club has grown, that commitment to the Chin community of Indiana is now a core part of this new club, correct?
Yes, I mean, it goes a little bit hand in hand, because about a third of the members right now, maybe about 40% even, are actually Chin, and the others, of course, are non-Chin. And we hope to get more of the Chin involved, but again, there is a cultural barrier, if you will. They're not used to belonging to clubs, if you will, and so we're working very hard, and we're getting the Chins that speak English well, because the ones who don't feel comfortable, in a meeting setting. So you can understand why they're reluctant to join. But the ones who had been here 10, 15, 20, 25 years, speak English very well.
And so, Jeff, there's a new club that I heard is getting started on the northwest side of Indianapolis that also has a very international message, correct?
Yes, we haven't really gotten there yet, but we're working on a new club, basically in the old Lafayette Square area. And there's a place called the International Marketplace there. And there are 50 ethnic restaurants and 50 ethnic grocery stores there. And so we met with the International Marketplace, the Chin community leader and I did, and we talked about Rotary, and she was very excited about it. And then one of our members of our club is from Zimbabwe, and he's only been in our country 2 years, and he lives in that area, fortunately. So it was just good karma for us that he said, I want to be the champion to help start a satellite club in this area, so that maybe we can do back to our country what some of the Chins are doing here in Indiana, because a lot of the Chins send money back to Burma to help their families that are still there. So we haven't had the first organizational meeting. A lot of it is because of COVID. Everybody's reluctant to, get out and do things, but we have very high hopes, because the International Marketplace is also creating something called a World Expo Center, or a Global Center, I think they call it. And so there'll be corridors with every continent represented, showing all the different artifacts and mementos from each of those continents.
And so, Jeff, let's talk a little bit about your background as a Rotarian. I know you've been a member for at least a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And so can you share with us your story and what brought you to Rotary?
Yeah, I've been a member about 31 years, and I started in Evansville, Indiana. My wife and I moved there from New Jersey. And when I moved there, her mom was there and her brother was there. So that's why we moved. But I've asked people, and we owned a sporting goods store. We started a sporting goods store there. So that was the first thing we did. But I asked people, well, what can I do to get involved in the community? Because I always wanted to be involved with things. And they said two things: the Rotary Club, the Downtown Rotary Club of Evansville, and the Chamber of Commerce. And so I got involved with both of those groups. And I was in that club for 20 years, and I've been in the Downtown Indianapolis Club for 11 years. But all it took was one gentleman that I knew from another little mentoring group I was in to say, why don't you come with me to Rotary and check it out? And I did, and then I was hooked. And really, sometimes that's all it takes, as you know.
Yes. And so, Jeff, I want to ask you, what message do you have for anyone who is considering Rotary or may not have known about Rotary before today?
Mm-hmm.
And what would you say to them to encourage them to visit a club or check out Rotary for themselves in more detail?
Yes, I think because I've been around for 31 years, I've seen changes, a lot of changes. And as you know, now Rotary International is much more flexible than they may have been in the past. So what they're saying and what we're saying to people is you do what works for your club. We're not going to tell you, you have to meet on a noon on a Tuesday and you have to meet 4 times a month. You just choose what works for you. And so that's allowed us to find people that weren't necessarily drawn to the other clubs that were already existing because it was the wrong day, the wrong time, the wrong cost structure. And so now we have lower cost, more flexible times. You don't have to meet every week. You can meet every 2 weeks. You do a service project. You can have a happy hour. You could do lots of different things instead of just having a meeting where you have a program and a speaker. That's great in a way because it's very educational to a lot of people. But on the other hand, it doesn't allow for a lot of interaction. I know the interaction comes from service projects. I know your club does one at Sunny Day, I think it's called.
Mhm.
And people get to know each other better there. You have happy hours and people get to know each other better there. So these are the kind of things we're doing that we think will attract people. And I think there's proof in the pudding. I got a call from the West Lafayette, well, it's a Lafayette Daybreak Club, and they meet at like 7:30 in the morning. And the person who called was a board member. And she said, I've heard about these new satellite clubs, and we really need one here because there are a bunch of us people that just can't make this daytime 7:30 work, and we can't do noon either. So we need to have a flexible schedule, maybe at night, and just much more flexible. So they are very quickly working on doing the application for becoming a satellite club. And what it's going to do is going to draw people in that are younger because it's not during the workday. It's going to be, probably at night, and it's going to be diverse. It's not going to be, every week. It's going to be much more flexible. So these I think, are things that most people who are younger than I am would appreciate the fact that, there's this flexibility about how you can operate your club.
And so, Jeff, I know you have a fundraiser coming up with the Southport International Rotary Club this week. Would you like to share a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. Next Tuesday at City Barbecue in Well, actually, it's actually in Indianapolis on the border of Greenwood. It's at City Barbecue on US 31, and you can eat there morning, noon, and night. And a percentage of those proceeds are going to go to the Southport, Satellite Club. And one of the things that many people have done is there was a big fire, you may have heard, on the South Side apartments, and 44 people were displaced, and most of them were Chin. And so there are a lot of fundraisers to try to help these people, get back on their feet, get new furniture, find a new place to live, maybe in some cases. And so this is next Tuesday. If you can eat there anytime during the day, and just mention it's for the Rotary Club of Southport, and a certain percentage, I think it's 20-25%, will go back to the club.
And so, Jeff, we normally ask all of our guests, and since you have been a business owner in your career, we always try to ask, what do you wish you knew as a new business owner?
That's interesting because we started, I was in the corporate world for a lot of years. And then when we moved to Evansville, we decided, to do something different. So we just, out of the blue, started a sporting goods store. And it was a franchise. And the franchise actually went out of business, which was really not a bad thing because you pay franchise fees and you're stuck with certain things because you're part of that franchise. You had their name, but their name wasn't well known. It was called Sport About. And I'm guaranteeing you, most of the people have never heard about Sport About. And so it really didn't help us that much to have that name. So one thing that I wish I would have known about before, even though I stumbled across it later on, was franchising. Because a lot of franchising has a much greater success for small business than someone who just hangs up their shingle and tries to go it alone, because they have a structure, they have a name, I mean, you think of Subway or any of these others, franchises. McDonald's has thousands of them. Of course, these are expensive, but there are smaller franchises too. And we have a member in our club whose name is Jeff Crane, and he operates something called Entrepreneur Source, and he helps people, figure out, if they want to be an entrepreneur. And I think he talks a lot about franchising. So I think the one thing I wish I knew more about before I actually got into it was the franchising world.
Awesome. And Jeff, how can our viewers and listeners get in touch with you if they'd like to learn more about Rotary or learn more about the fundraiser coming up on November 3rd?
Well, I think probably the easiest thing would be my email address, if that's okay to give to you. It would be Lake, L-A-K-E, Jeff, J-E-F-F, 960 @gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being our guest today. And to everyone watching and listening, thank you for catching this episode of the Open in Indiana podcast. Catch our next episode soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Open in Indiana podcast. If you enjoyed listening, subscribe to us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Music, iHeartRadio, or on our website, openinIndiana.com/OII podcast. Thanks for listening.